Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our nominees here for your willingness to serve our great nation. And I appreciate the willingness as well for your families who will be sacrificing alongside you as you serve our country. So thank you. As the Philippines is going to be the chair for ASEAN in 2026, it does so against the backdrop of escalating aggression from communist China, certainly, especially in the West Philippine Sea. Ramming vessels, deploying maritime militias, intimidating fishing vessels, attempting to rewrite international law through coercion. And we just saw this play out again on Tuesday near Scarborough Shoal, where more than 20 Filipino fishing boats were harassed by a coordinated Chinese presence. For years, ASEAN has pursued a voluntary code of conduct that Beijing has slow-rolled and watered down, all while continuing to militarize disputed features and intimidate its neighbors. Now, under Philippine leadership, there is a renewed push to finally a legally binding code of conduct alongside a dramatic expansion of the U.S.-Philippines military cooperation. That dual-track approach reflects a clear reality that diplomacy without deterrence has failed to constrain Communist China's behavior. The question is now whether ASEAN can produce something credible and enforceable, or whether this becomes yet again another agreement that Beijing ignores and continues on its path of coercion. Mr. Kim, how can ASEAN ensure that any future code of conduct includes enforcement mechanisms rather than vague commitments from that Beijing can ignore?
Senator, first and foremost, deterrence is based on both credibility and capabilities. So it is critical that ASEAN member states, and particularly those with a stake in the South China Sea, have the capabilities to bolster deterrence. Second, with respect to the credibility, I think that's where the diplomatic components and the soft elements of national power come in. In terms of ASEAN's ongoing, quite frankly, decades-long negotiations with Beijing on the code of conduct, there's a reason why the two sides have failed to reach an agreement, because ASEAN is an organization, is an institution that operates based on consensus. So for all 11 governments to form consensus on what the region's outlook on maritime issues vis-a-vis China are is very, very difficult. Based on open source reporting, the Philippines and the Philippines as the ASEAN chair has had conversations and discussions with China regarding South China Sea. My understanding is that those discussions are ongoing. What's important from the United States perspective is that whatever outcomes, if they are agreed upon, and throughout the process, that we remain engaged and coordinated with all members of ASEAN, particularly the Philippines, which is a treaty ally of the United States, to ensure that our interests, which is primarily based on the fact that the sea lanes of Southeast Asia must remain free and open for the entire world and not dominated by a single hegemonic power. That should be our overriding objective, Senator.
So given the consensus-based nature of ASEAN, how can you specifically help the Philippines in pushing along some of this code of conduct that actually would be legally binding? What can you specifically do?
I think if confirmed, what I could specifically do, or the role that I could play, is ensure that the Philippines understands what the objective of the United States is, and that any negotiating done between the chair along with other ASEAN member states reflects that of the United States, to understand exactly what our interests are, what the Philippines can and cannot or should not pursue, and to the extent possible, apply all elements of national power to ensure those objectives. Because, as noted in my statement, the United States, in order for us to be safe and prosperous moving forward, we need continued unfettered access to the region.
We're seeing a growing divide within ASEAN. Some nations, particularly those economically dependent on Beijing, have grown increasingly aligned with Communist China. Others are trying to hedge between the United States and Communist China, while Beijing continues to build artificial islands, militarize disputed territory, and interfere with lawful maritime activity across the South China Sea. Communist China's strategy is not about partnership, it's about dominance. You mentioned it before. It uses its economic leverage, coercion, and ICAD tactics to bend countries to its will. And when ASEAN fails to respond collectively, it only reinforces Beijing's belief it can act with impunity. If left unchecked, this dynamic risks turning ASEAN into a forum that accommodates Chinese aggression rather than constrains it. How will you push ASEAN partners to recognize that China's actions, particularly those in the South China Sea, pose a direct threat to their sovereignty and long-term security?
Senator, ASEAN member states clearly understand the threats that they face better than anyone else. They live it each day. You mentioned the disputes and the actions that the Philippines, their sailors, their fishermen have to endure on an ongoing basis. So fundamentally, it's about maintaining open channels of communication and ensuring that our diplomatic engagements with ASEAN member states are fundamentally rested on shared transparency about what's happening in the region. All we have to do is very simple, which is to show what the Chinese are doing in the region, and the actions speak for themselves.
Right. Well, I look forward to working with you because obviously this is something that is incredibly important, as you mentioned, to the United States, but also to some of our treaty allies like the Philippines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Kane.